Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivara Dhari 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 Jasodhanandana Brajajanadandana Dhanna Brajajanada Jasodhanandana Brajajanadandana Nandana Brajajanada Jamuna Tira Vana Sadi Yamuna Tira Vanapchadi Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hadi Radha Madhava Kunjabi Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hadi Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hadi Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivara Dhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivara Dhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivara Dhari Girivara Dhari Jasodhanandana Brajajanadandana Jasodhanandana Brajajanadandana Dhanna Brajajanada Yamuna Tira Vanapchadi Vanacha Yamuna Tira Vanapchadi Vanacha Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hadi Madhava Kunjabi Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hadi Madhava Kunjabi Hadi Jayom Paramahansa Parivajagacharya Astatara Satyasi Srimad His Divine Grace Sri Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnavadinda Ki Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Gaur Premanandi Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya This evening, if all goes well, I will be able to complete Canto 10, Chapter 9, the Damodara Lila, and have a little celebration because it's been going on for quite some time for me. Well over 50 hours of plunging into the pastime. The end of chapter 9 is a transition to chapter 10. The Damodara Lila itself, the binding of Krishna, has now been accomplished. And Krishna is going to move very fluidly into the next Lila, the deliverance of Nalakuvera and Manigriva. In the description of the Damodara Lila, we hear different versions, but the Bhagavatam version specifically is, after Krishna broke the butter pot, he went to a storeroom, and from the storeroom he took another butter pot, and he went outside the storeroom into the courtyard in the direction of the Yamala Arjun trees. And the courtyard and the Yamala Arjun trees were near the gate. So one of the reasons that Mother Yashoda was worried was she was afraid her son might, out of fear, run away into the forest and encounter dangerous creatures in the forest. And so part of the reason for tying him was so he wouldn't run away. And once he was tied up, he wasn't alone. There were a number of his friends with him, because his friends play an important part in what happens later in this chapter 10. They tell the story of what happened, and the adults go, oh, children's talk. But they saw everything, and so this is a transition from one Leela to the next. Now it's just a part of the big picture of the whole of Krishna's pastimes in Braja. He is a little bit more than 3 years old, because shortly after this pastime comes the move from Gokul to Vrindavan, and the crashing down of the twin Arjuna trees is like too much for everybody. It made a big sound. So the demons and this and that. So they very soon after this pastime they shift from Gokul to Vrindavan. In his Vrindavan pastimes, which, according to what we read at Gopastami anyways, last for... there's different ways of counting. Anyway, without going into it too much, commonly it's said 11 years, 8 months. Because when he was 12, commonly, there's different details. When he was 12 is when he received Upanayana and then went off to school and so forth. So those pastimes are so celebrated. And there's a reason that, the volumes and volumes and volumes and volumes and volumes and volumes and volumes of writings and commentary and storytelling, and in part because they're charming, but there's something spiritually very special about their charmingness. And the charmingness is, we can say it simply, the sweetness and majesty at the same time. The Madhurya and the Aishwarya at the same time. And there isn't the same sweetness outside of Vrindavan. There's certainly the Aishwarya, and there certainly is sweetness, but not the same. The magnitude or level or intensity of what the residents of Vrindavan feel for Krishna, in turn what Krishna feels for the resident of Vrindavan, it's another world. It's the dearest to Krishna. Now one would think, if it's the dearest to Krishna, then he should never leave Vrindavan. But he left Vrindavan. But he didn't leave Vrindavan. Another aspect of Krishna left Vrindavan. Vasudeva Krishna left Vrindavan. Vasudeva Krishna, we heard. Vasudeva Krishna, Rupa Goswami says, Vishnav Chakravarti Thakur says, it's not spoken about in Srimad Bhagavatam. It's very confidential and esoteric. But Vasudeva Krishna merged into Swayam Bhagavan Krishna. The two boys were born simultaneously. We've been hearing this. And when Krishna leaves, it's Vasudeva Krishna that goes back. And even when in Vrindavan, it was Vasudeva Krishna who was killing demons. So the Acharyas speak of this demon killing and the deliverance of Nalakurva and Manigriva. That's it's Naimittika Lila, his occasional pastimes. And it's not the essence. For Krishna, I mean, he does it, but it's not for Krishna, it's not the essence. It's certainly like a high point, but and the residents of Vrindavan take it very differently. They take it with the sweetness aspect. Mother Jasoda is thinking, because of Nanda Maharaj's piety, it's protecting Krishna. A wind came and blew over the trees. And etc., etc., etc. So in this pastime, he's while the Damodara Lila is going on, it's these two, Krishna showing his. Look, when you get to your Bhagavatam next time, look at 10, 9, 13, 14. And you'll find the contradiction. There's the divinity feature right in the middle of the sweetness feature. She can't bind him with her rope because he's exhibiting his divinity feature. And she doesn't see that. She's bewildered. 150 feet of rope. Doesn't go around the little boy's waist, as big as my fist. And it's always 2 inches or 2 fingers. No matter how much rope, it's always so. There's another verse in that chapter where she is able to bind him. Although he's this and this and this and this and this, she's able to bind him. And so he's controlled by the love of. I mean, that's the speciality of. It came out in the class with the Chinese devotees this morning. So now he's in Vrindavan. He's with his cowherd boy friends. It's the Vrindavan mood for his cowherd boy friends. But Krishna is now going to smoothly transition between his all-knowing and sweet pastime and move more into the all-knowing pastime, an almighty pastime that is knocking over the 2 trees. And it has to do with his love for Narada. Because Narada said, because Narada said, I have to do. He's controlled by the love of his devotee. And he does. He does, what's not possible by any stretch of the imagination. A little boy that's 3 years old, pulling behind him a grinding mortar that's as big as, and heavy. It's not, it's purposely big and heavy. It's a grinding mortar. And not only that, but it knocks over the 2 trees. We talked about this, who can uproot big trees? 3-year-old boy. That's not possible. But he's he's exhibiting his almightiness, or his opulence of all strength. Now, and even further removed, besides the reciprocation with his devotee Narada being controlled by Narada, he has some affection for these sons of Kuvera. Kuvera is a demigod, and these are his sons, and they're ready, and they do become elevated devotees because he's giving them his association, his darshan, their prayers, his words, his benedictions. So it's the end of 9 is a transition, and so it's moving into the almightiness. In fact, that's what's in the very first line of text 23. We're reading 10.9.23. 10.9.23. Pura Narada Shapena. Pura, previously. Narada Shapena, cursed by Narada Muni. Shapena. Rikshatam, in the form of trees. These two sons, Nalakuvara was one of them, Manigriva was the other. They attained form of trees. So in their former birth, these two sons, known as Nalakuvara and Manigriva, were extremely opulent and fortunate. But because of false prestige, they did not care about anyone. And thus Narada Muni cursed them to become trees. And there's no Prabhupada purport for this. Here's Vishwanath, short. Out of debt to my mother, I have been bound by her. What can I do to clear this debt? Going back to the beginning of chapter 9, he wanted to be admonished. She did what he wanted, of course, and now he's indebted to her for binding him with a rope. Thinking in this way, he liberated the two trees situated in the yard. Jiva Goswami writes, in the previous verse it mentions that Krishna saw the trees. It is possible that he saw the trees previously also, but now consideration is given to the special circumstance of his bondage, Though he was bound by the action of the Lila Shakti, since it was suitable for the bhava of the occasion, it was suitable that he considered the bondage of Kuvera's sons, when he was also in bondage. Thus, he saw the trees and began to consider. He considered, the two have become trees by the curse of Narada because of pride and madat, intoxication, since they had plenty of wealth. Sanatana Goswami writes, again very short, because they were proud or intoxicated, madat, the wealthy sons were cursed. They were wealthy, or as Arjuna trees, they were beautiful with flowers. Shriyanvatau. Now, that's it for text 23. Now we're going to read a little bit. There's some reference to this 10.9.23 in other portions of the Bhagavatam, and references made in 10.10.24, which is the next chapter, the deliverance chapter. Krishna, to fulfill the truthfulness of the words of the greatest devotee Narada, slowly went to that spot where the twin Arjuna trees were standing. And the commentary, this is Jiva Goswami commentary to that verse. Having described the history, Shukadev now shows what Krishna did when he remembered that the two sons of Kuvera were trees, which was described previously in text 23 of this chapter. It was proper that Narada's words should come true. Krishna began to make this happen. Hari, or to take away, indicates that the Lord wanted to deliver the two from the curse. He went slowly because he feared the sound that he produced would bring his mother and others. He did this slowly because he was a small child. Also because the mortar would not come loose if it was pulled gently. He crawled so that he could pull the mortar strongly. This is mentioned in the second canto, 2.7.27. Simply by crawling between the two Arjuna trees which touched the heavens, he uprooted them. And that's it for chapter 9 of Canto 10. Yay! Serve the prasadam. So, what I'm going to do now is read Jiva Goswami's Gopal Champu, whole description of the whole Leela from the beginning. And this is really sweet. I hope you have a seatbelt. It's really lovely. Gopal Champu is narrated by two brothers, Snigdhakanta and Madhukanta. They're disciples of Narada. They're in Vrindavan during the 2 months that Krishna was in Vrindavan. They're introduced into the assembly. The Nanda and Yasoda and everybody's there. Krishna's there, Radharani's there. Everybody's there in Vrindavan together. And they're hearing Krishna's pastimes in Vrindavan from these two brothers. And it's when they're introduced as Narada gave them the benediction, something like Valmiki, that they could actually know the details of the pastime, although they weren't there. They could see, they could understand the emotion, etc. They were like very powerful, and they're very sweet speakers. So here we go. It happens in the morning, and in the evening they go home. When the cowherds seated themselves in the assembly on another day, in the early morning, Snigdhakanta spoke as follows. Once at the end of Kartik month, joyful Yashoda saw that Krishna was sleeping with his eyes, which were beautiful as blue lotuses, with his eyes closed. Caressing him gently with her hand as he lay on the bed, she let him sleep. Slowly leaving the bed and going outside the room, she quickly tied up her cloth to engage in household chores in the early morning and began churning yogurt. On that day, Rohini mounted a chariot with Balaram and went to the house of Upananda. By a special invitation, as if pulled by the ropes of affection, the affectionate servants came to complete their work. They were busily engaged because a great festival of Indra, traditional in the family, respected by all people, would be held at the beginning of the last month of the year, Magashirsha. While the servant women were arriving for their jobs, Yashoda was carefully engaged in churning the yogurt and singing, while thinking that today her son was sleeping late. Absorbed in her son, she began singing about his pastimes while gazing at his face. Shukadev has said, gives the Sanskrit, which says, one day, this is Bhagavatam 10.9.2. He intersperses his narrative with actual verses of the Bhagavatam. He's just building it. One day, text 2 of chapter 9, when Mother Yashoda saw that all the maidservants were engaged in other household affairs, she personally began to churn the yogurt. While churning, she remembered the childish activities of Krishna, and in her own way, she composed songs and enjoyed singing to herself about all those activities. This is Yasoda Darshan. She had a belt shining with jewels on her blue swaying cloth and was decorated with attractive jingling bells. She churned the yogurt with her two hands repeatedly while looking at the face of her son, who was just beginning to open his eyes. Her song. "O Tilak of the family of Nanda, you are living in Braja. Since the people here have done hundreds of pious acts, you have given them great happiness. Seeing your actions, the eyes become joyful. By the great festival arising from this bliss, you give bliss to all the cowherds. O King of Gokula, filled with the auspicious actions of killing Putana. You engaged in auspicious acts after overturning the cart, which destroyed the steadiness of our hearts. The Supreme Lord has brought you back after he killed the whirlwind demon. You crawl about in the beautiful yard, lotus-eyed child. You are the greatest piety. You show the greatest skill at dancing and playing. You appear most attractive when you hold onto the calves' tails. You show false greed in arguing for fun with the elders. Oh, Krishna, give happiness to me, your mother. Stay in the house always. Please reveal your playful antics and grow quickly. You showed the power of the Lord, causing astonishment and showing the universe within you. May your body remain without old age and death and become the cause of joy by worshiping the Lord. It's part of the style of Champu is at intervals there's a song. And apparently it's meant to be narrated where they move from narration to singing and then back to narration. So that was the singing part. Here's the narration part. The ocean of beauty woke up and immediately began crying. Getting up, he went to his mother. He appeared to his mother and others as follows. Breathing heavily, bending his limbs, rubbing his eyes, he cried, "Mother, mother!" Hearing the sound of churning, he walked on faltering feet to his mother. When Krishna stopped the movement of the churning rod with his soft words, filled with affection, caused by his mother's caring attitude, Yashoda fed the infant milk. When the milk flowed from Yashoda like monsoon rains, Krishna was like a chataka bird drinking those showers. When Krishna had only half finished drinking, Yashoda, thinking that the milk in the next room may be boiling over, put Krishna down and went to the other room, thinking that she may drop him since she was moving very fast. Madhukanta said, "How could this happen? How could she think of leaving her son, who was becoming thin from hunger, since she was the spotless example of love for her child?" Snigdhakanta spoke with a smile. First hear this, since Yashoda was the perfection of motherly affection. Madhukanta said, "What is that?" Snigdhakanta said, "Her parents thought, quote, 'This is my son. and from birth had possessiveness with complete disregard for their own bodies and houses. Brahma has said the following concerning all the people of Raja, what to speak of his parents. So now he quotes 10:14:35. So what is left for you, Brahma speaking to Krishna, to give to these devotees of Vrindavan whose homes, wealth, friends, dear relations, bodies, children, and very lives and hearts are all dedicated only to you? Since the milk and yogurt were for Krishna, they were even more attractive than Krishna. This is the special nature of her love. This was her way of thinking. Enduring great difficulties, she was not aware of her household chores that should be done. She thought more of Krishna as her son than her body and house. Making Krishna the object of her compassion, she thought that her duty was to serve Krishna. Krishna also understood that her scolding and punishments were her show of affection. What more can be said of her affectionate caring for him? When the inhabitants of Braja became angry with him, it increased their love for him, just as sometimes the fire of lightning is seen in the thick cloud. The mother and son mutually benefit each other. When she went to take the milk off the fire, she spoke in joy. I worship you with aratrik. But for a moment, please protect the churning pot. After taking care of the milk, I will come as quickly as I can. When she quickly went from the churning place and then returned, the cloth covering her breasts completely sprinkled the path with milk. But because his desire was obstructed, Krishna became upset. His lips red with anger and tears flowing from his eyes, he began to cry. He broke the pot with some stones, but did not touch a particle of the butter. Poets describe this. Now here's a singing section again. The white moons of his teeth became red like his lips, and his eyes, like chakora birds, became filled with tears. With his 2 lotus hands, he destroyed the yogurt pot, showing his strength. The yogurt within remained intact. Krishna then created another festival. He carefully took the ghee from the hanging pot and began eating it. Then he took the ghee pot away through a side door. Carefully, he struck the door panel to loosen the bolt and then entered the storeroom, bolting the door after entering. Using a wooden bed to climb, he stole the ghee and then fled when no one was looking. Yashoda, seeing the milk had thickened on the stove, took the pot off and quickly returned to her son. Knowing the type of actions of her son, she felt both anger and joy, and then smiled. Though she worried at first, a message from the sky caused her to smile. The voice from the sky said, another singing section, the baby bee, being very thirsty, has not been fully satisfied with honey, and has thus broken the lotus bud. On breaking the lotus, and seeing only the contents flow out without honey, the bee has gone to another lotus to obtain honey. Moreover, you have shown skill in taking the milk off the fire, but you will be praised more for your ability to pacify the anger of your son. A voice from the sky. Hearing this, she smiled. Seeing his footprints of buttermilk, which indicated the path of his theft, By her own means, she was able to unbolt the door and then acted as follows. When Yashoda left the room and saw that her son had made mischief, she followed him, and then she saw he was looking around with fearful eyes. He was moving his eyes about. Quote, I have stolen the ghee, and mother will see me. How will I meet her gaze? Fearing her, he moved his eyes from ear to ear. He overturned a mortar and sat on it while feeding monkeys. As his eyes moved here and there, seeing him do this, Yashoda smiled slightly and became filled with astonishment. She silently approached in order to catch her thieving son. But seeing her, he began to flee. It is well known that the thief has 100 eyes, whereas the owner of wealth has only 2 eyes. The proud monkeys became full from eating the butter. Yashoda took a stick and covered it with cloth, approaching him. Seeing her, it quickly climbed a tree. This is a new part of the Lila. She ran after her fleeing son, but the flowers fell from her bound hair. King of thieves, where are you going? Her beauty increased by his indistinct smiling and crying. She pursued him to catch him, but she could not catch him, just as a group of clouds going west by the wind cannot catch a small cloud going to the east. He ran where he thought his mother could not follow him. Thinking no one else was around, she followed him. When he ran without looking back, she could not catch him. But when he looked back in fear, she was able to catch him with her hand. He used his eyes to find some way of escaping and began weeping to remove his mother's anger. He made his body falsely tremble out of boldness, but he could not wipe out his bad behavior. When she came face to face with him, she tried to cover his ghee-soaked limbs by smearing himself with dust. He tried to cover his ghee-soaked limbs by smearing himself with dust. Seeing this, Yashoda said, If you want to steal in this house, then look at this stick in my hand. When her lotus-eyed son was overcome with fear, hearing this, she threw down her stick. Mother, do not beat me! With a hidden smile, she said, But you are a thief? In this way, a quarrel began. Ah, you're the king of thieves! Your father's lineage is all thieves. In this way, the mother argued with the infant who had stolen the ghee. How did you break the yogurt pot? It was the Supreme Lord's stick. That's his reply. Who gave ghee to the monkeys? He who created the monkeys gave it to them. I think that you always taste and eat the fresh ghee meant for sacrifices. After Yashoda scolded the infant as a thief, her heart softened. Smiling, but with anger, she said, You should tell your secret and give up your pride. When his mother said this, her son began weeping. When you ran quickly, the pot broke because of being struck by your anklets. What is my fault in this? Inspired by the Lord, the monkeys entered the house to steal. When they pulled at the ghee, I caught it. Was this my fault? Seeing you holding a stick, I ran away like a thief. Seeing that I was frightened, you tried to mercilessly beat me without justice. 3-year-old boy. Yashoda spoke with repentance. "Oh, best of thieves," with clever words. "Though you are the son of the king of Vraja, you are fond of monkeys and have the nature of a monkey. Fearful, and to give fear to his mother, he said, 'If I am a monkey, then I will go to the forest and stay there.' His mother began to worry with fear. Who can understand him? A proud child will do this. I must tie him up to prevent this, since I am alone and cannot continue to pay attention to both the house and this child." But she spoke aloud. "Oh, thief, who bewilders everyone with your restless eyes, do not think of avoiding me. After binding you up, I will go to the house quickly. If you show your strength, then steal something else." When she began tying him up, he became so angry that he breathed with a hissing sound. He said, "Rohini, where have you gone with Balaram? Because you are not here, she is binding me up. Please come quickly." Because Rohini was far away, she could not hear. But other women, who were neighbors, who had previously scolded him, heard his cries and came. They laughed and said, "Has he done anything at your house?" So that she would remember her own previous words. Ignoring their words, Yashoda took an old string from her hair and began binding him around the waist to the mortar near the outer door, just as Rudra's followers bound up Daksha to teach him a lesson. But the string was 2 fingers too short. She took another string from her hair and tied the 2 together, but still the string was 2 fingers short. Even when the other women gave the churning rope, she could not tie him up. Just as a cloud touching a far mountain appears to not touch it, so the rope around his waist appeared to be 2 fingers too short. The other women laughed and said, "Oh, Yashoda, we told you previously that he makes the original thief, Kapalaka," I don't know who that is, "tremble by his great power, bewilderment. He shows himself to be a thief, taking joy in eating stolen goods." She said, "He was born at the wrong time. Thus he does not know good from bad. But I think you have been put under a spell, since internally you are prejudiced against him, but externally you show yourselves differently." Laughing, they said, "Falling at your feet, we swear that we are not under some amazing spell." She then began to think. According to Garga's words, the Lord's powers are covering this boy, and he does not know what is happening. She repeatedly brought churning ropes from the women's houses to see the limits of astonishment and tried to bind him up but found no way to do so. Attempting to bind her son, she found no end in this endless task. Perspiration flowed over her limbs and her hair became loose. As much as Krishna made efforts to show his stubbornness, Yashoda's attempts became useless, as if under the influence of bad planets. It is understood that when his mind became moved by her fatigue, he became bound up by the first 2 ropes alone. All the other ropes became unnecessary. The performer of actions, Yogamaya, acting according to his desire, created this incident for his mother, which appeared like some illusion. Yogamaya performed such acts daily. Having tied up Krishna, she lengthened the rope with the other ropes and tied him to the mortar. Having tied him up and showing harshness to him to teach him, his mother went to do her household chores and with the other women who were laughing. She placed other boys around him to protect him. So that I'm going to end there, so you can be in suspense for tomorrow, and we can hear the rest tomorrow, the Yamala Arjun portion. So just to give you some idea, this is page 134 out of 187. There's more than 50 pages more to go on the Damodara Lila. I mean, I think by the end of this month I'll finish the Damodar month. But I should try to finish up by Wednesday morning, because after Wednesday morning comes Wednesday evening, and Wednesday evening is the beginning of the Thanksgiving seminar on the Putana Lila. 16 parts, Putana Lila. And that's going to have, going to keep our cameraman more busy, because there's a PowerPoint presentation with there's so many, like the Damodara Lila, so many paintings, and the Putana Lila, so many paintings. They're very celebrated pastimes, like Govardhan Lila, so many paintings. Krishna's childhood pastimes are so celebrated. And it was less than 12 years. And he lived for 125 years. We hear some other things, but nothing like the childhood pastimes. Braja Lila. Very, very special. In this narration, the audience is the Brijbasis themselves. When Shukadeva Goswami is speaking, he's speaking to Maharaj Parikshit, who's not a Brijbasi. He's a pure devotee, a very elevated personality, and he is feeling ecstatic feelings just hearing the narration of Shukadeva Goswami. But this Gopal Champu, it reminds me a little bit of Vrindavan Das Thakur and how he writes Chaitanya Bhagavat. Vrindavan Das Thakur just didn't give a hoot about, that people understand or don't understand. He's not even concerned. It's just spontaneous. He's narrating facts, but in the midst of the facts, there's these outbursts of joy and just glorification expressions of different devotees and Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda and whatever he's feeling, he just writes it. So Jiva Goswami Prabhupada told a story, I forget the name of some professor, who, from India, a scholarly fellow, in some public assembly spoke about Jiva Goswami, saying that there has never been in the history of the world a greater philosopher than Jiva Goswami. So he is a philosopher. I mean, the rigors of his writings are exhaustive. Not exhausting, but exhaustive. And, from all angles and so forth. It references from all sources. Very profound person. And then here in the midst of all of that is this Gopal Champu. He's relishing. And he has different audiences that he's addressing. So he's relishing with the scholarly folks, and he's relishing with ordinary folks the pastimes of Krishna from different angles. And like this, all these little embellishments, like his Krishna's crawling up a tree. I never heard that one before. Never heard that one before. So how do we process stuff like that? There's two little references I'll make. In more than one occasion, Prabhupada expressed that there's no difficulty in different acharyas holding different opinions. Now, for our Western binary processor, the brain, or the mind, if it's this, it can't be that. And if it's that, it can't be this. It can't be this and that. But the pastimes of Krishna are unlimited. And of course, staying strictly to the thread of what Scripture says, embellishments may come. Just like this one that we read about the other day. It came up twice. That when Krishna was born, he was simultaneously appeared as the son of Vasudeva Devaki and Nanda Jasoda. And Rupa Goswami writes that it's not expressed in Srimad Bhagavatam because it's very esoteric and not easily understood, and therefore it's not there. But there are indications elsewhere, and our acharyas have confirmed. So we don't read it in Srimad Bhagavatam. So when I heard this the first time, it was like, what? But Rupa Goswami is not a fiction writer. Jiva Goswami is not a fiction writer. They're not just writing because it's entertaining and it'll hold the audience the attention of an audience, and so he puts it in there because it's cute. But so how do we understand these things? Then one nice reference, besides different acharyas may hold different views. In a nice answer, philosophical, scriptural answer, Brahma Samhita text 61, Yadrashi Shraddha, Siddhi Bhavati Tadrashi. So Yadrashi Tadrashi, like Yavat Tavat. It's indicating a metaphor, a comparison. So as something known, something unknown. Shraddha is one's faith. As one's faith is inclined, Siddhi Bhavati. Bhaktisiddhanta's, precise translation in this case of Siddhi means realization. The realization of an acharya in samadhi is going to correspond with their faith. Just like the whole of the Bhagavatam is Vyasadev's samadhi. He's not storytelling or making things up. He's holding that in his heart in samadhi. So is it only possible for Vyasadeva to be in samadhi and to have realizations? Like that's Rupa Goswami. Was it possible for Rupa Goswami to be in trance of meditation on Krishna and have experience of Krishna in a way that we don't find in the Bhagavatam? And when he had those experiences, he would write them. He'd come into the external world of us and instructed by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to do so, wrote books. He wrote the philosophical And he wrote the pastime because they're not different. They're of the same transcendental nature. The philosophical can explain the transcendental pastimes, but the pastimes are supported by the philosophical. They're interwoven. They're not separable. One may emphasize this or that. A real nice example of this, it's kind of off the Damodar topic, but when we visit Vrindavan, let's see if Mr. Pandemic will allow us to visit Vrindavan in Kartik next year. His brother COVID. If we'll go to Govardhan Hill, and we go to Govardhan Hill, we'll likely also go to Radhakund Shamakund. Maybe we'll make a special trip. But there's at Shamakund, there's a ghat where the gopis would regularly bathe in Shamakund. And it's at the top of the steps of that ghat where Raghunath Das kept his bhajan kutir, where Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami kept his bhajan kutir, and many other, celebrated during that period of time when Radhakund was being excavated and so forth, where they resided. Trying to remember her name. Anyway, what's the name? Please help me if someone can remember. The name of the female disciple of Haridas Pandit that later went to, under Haridas Pandit's direction, to Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya's temple and began worshipping the temple. Huh? Yeah. Sweta Ganga. Yes? Sweta Ganga? The Ganga Mata Goswamini. Ganga Mata Goswamini. She has an ashram right in that area. She has anyway, it's a celebrated area where people that are deeply absorbed. So one day, Rupa Goswami made some writing about Krishna's pastimes that he was realizing. And he had a practice of, as he was writing something, he would take it to his elder brother for approval. So his elder brother liked, but one of the parts he didn't like was Rupa Goswami's describing the braid of Radharani's hair looking like a snake crawling up her back. He said, he didn't say anything, but when he read it, it was... So later that day, he said, let me, I'll give you some comments later. So later that day, he was seated. One of the places of Sanatana Goswami is directly opposite that ghat, on the other side of Shamakund. So on the other side of Shamakund, at that ghat, he saw some girls playing and singing and carrying on what young girls do. And one of the young girls turned her back to Sanatana Goswami, and it looked like to him there was a snake crawling up her back, and he called out very loudly, "Look out!" And she turned around and smiled, and it was Radharani. And then the girls just disappeared. So later, Rupa came to visit him and said, "What did you have any further thoughts?" He said, "I really liked, especially like the part about the snake." So, these personalities were on another level of Krishna consciousness. It's directly written in Brahma Samhita like that, without going further into. Let's go back to Damodara Lila. But they have the capacity to experience, like Valmiki had the capacity to experience Ram's pastimes, as if he was right there, hearing their voices, seeing their facial expressions, and everything. Not just anyway, transcendently empowered to be a participant in the pastimes of the Supreme Lord. That's the place from which they're writing. Everything is supported by Scripture. They're not going to say something that's not supported by Scripture. But there's details and details here that's not within the ninth chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 10. And another acharya can have an experience of Krishna's pastimes that is slightly variegated because the pastimes are unlimited. It's not like, in material, so each of us can see this nice deity of Gopal. And each of us may have a different experience seeing deity Gopal, and he may have a different experience seeing us too. But so we may report what our experience is, and it may be when we describe it to someone, it's going to be a little different because we're individuals. So what to speak of Krishna's pastimes, and so the pastimes are unlimited. Krishna is unlimited, and one may experience something a little different. But using Prabhupada's phrase, the spool is the same. The bhav is the same. And it's just capturing the... Sridhar Swami's commentary on Srimad Bhagavatam, Sridhar Swami, Bhavartha Deepika, Bhava Artha Deepika, Bhava Artha Deepika. And it's like foundational. But others, subsequent acharyas, they don't try to surpass, but they may have some other realization other than Sridhar Swami's realization. Because their heart is being moved by Krishna in that deep absorption in. And that's what commentary is. That's what appropriate commentary is. Someone who's just absorbed. And Krishna reveals something, and they express that something that Krishna reveals. There's a big difference between mental speculation and commentary by advanced acharyas. Like this, I'm mentioning like this because this Gopal Champu has some parts to it that are a little different. So in one sense, we could say it's not as authoritative as Srimad Bhagavatam itself, or we can say they're as authoritative as Srimad Bhagavatam itself, because of the eminent nature of Jiva Goswami. So that's it for this evening. Let's see if there's some discussion. We got a little carried away with Gopal Champu. You have something? Prem Kishore, you have something?
Yeah, just would like to remind any persons in the Zoom call. Today we Central Jersey joined in Zoom as well.
Okay. Anyone?
I think I really enjoyed the class, especially the Gopal Champu part. Thank you so much for the little esoteric taste of the pastime. But there was one line that I had it was very beautiful, but I had some confusion on. When you were explaining how Yashoda, her duties towards Krishna were more dear to her than Krishna herself. I didn't really understand that. But does that mean our service should be more dear to?
No, it doesn't mean your service. It means Mother Yashoda. I mean, what's my qualification to saying what Mother Yashoda's feelings are? But her attachment to Krishna is such that beyond just his physical presence, of course, physical presence is, you're hearing the pastime and she's participating in the pastime. That's physical presence. And that's very, very special. It's one of the unique features of bhakti is that it's not just meditation, it's direct connection with the person. Like, just to go further with this, Gopakumar is not satisfied being in Tapaloka meditating and seeing Madan Gopal in his meditation, although he did. It just wasn't the same. When he finally is with Madan Gopal and embraces Madan Gopal and Madan Gopal embraces him, it's not the same as meditation. So there's something very special about her physical presence with Krishna. So my understanding is, maybe, not right on the mark, but my understanding is the attachment that she has is so strong that doing service for him is as meaningful to her as holding him in her lap and feeding him with her breast milk. I mean, she's in such, she's going to get the milk and the ground is being moistened by the water dripping from her breasts because this is her ecstasy. But that ecstasy is, as the milk that's on the stove is as important to her. Now, it doesn't say as important, it says more, that gives it a higher position. That I don't understand, other than saying just the physical presence is not everything. It's the essence of the service that's everything, in comparison to the physical. I mean, I'm thinking of a scene in everyday life where there's a small child and those who are motherly see the small child, and all of a sudden it's like they enter into another world of affection for that small child that's not their child.
Yeah.
It's amazing to watch. And it doesn't matter, all kinds of worldly circumstances, and it's just zap. And they're in another zone. They're in a mother zone. And it's not their child. So it's the motherly affection element more than, this is my child. So she's over the top with the word, the phrase that's used, even in this section, is possessiveness. Krishna's mine. But even more than, this child is my child, it's the service to the child takes precedence over than just the physical or the form aspect of Krishna. Anyway, that's the best I can do to respond to that question. Anyone else? All the way in the back, you have something?
Yes. Very wonderful class. You mentioned that Krishna was running out of fear from Mother Yashoda was chasing him. And Krishna was running and Mother was not able to catch him. But when Krishna turned and looked into Mother Yashoda, that time Mother Yashoda could catch him.
That's Jiva Goswami. It's not me.
Krishna got captured, or is there anything else?
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Let's say it negatively. It wasn't that he started running slower because he was looking back. And when he was looking forward, he was running faster. That wasn't it. You captured it. Good for you. He was captured by her love. His turning back was, the running and not turning back was also an expression from him to her of affection and her affection for him, because there's nothing else between the two of them. But his turning back is, you've captured me by your love. Then she could capture him. He yielded to her love. That's when I started this, in November 1st, because that's when the Kartik month began. Here we are, 23rd, and still, going at it. Why do we celebrate this one pastime for the whole month? What's so special about it? Why not Govardhan? And that's really nice to celebrate for a whole month, or some other of Krishna's pastimes. That's my favorite pastime, is Govardhan Lila, for many reasons. But it's this one. So what's special about this one? It's Mother Jasoda. Anyway, it's the nature of Krishna and the resident of Vrindavan. Krishna's controlled. We hear in the commentary of Acharyas, Krishna is controlled by all of his devotees, but not to the same degree as the residents of Vrindavan. It's just superlative. So Mother Jasoda binds Krishna, but the others don't necessarily with rope bind Krishna, but they bind Krishna without rope. They bind Krishna with their love. So yes, his turning around indicates you've captured me by your love. And then she could. It was very subtle. Anything else?
The speaker available?
Yeah, if someone speaks
Those people that are on the Zoom, if you want to speak, you just unmute yourself, and I hopefully will be able to hear you. Do we have anything in the chat box? And if not, we're done.
Yeah. Mr. Prabhu, you were saying you wanted to ask a question, right? So if you can kindly unmute and speak, Maharaj is waiting for your question.
Simeshwara? Yes?
Yes. He said.
Go ahead, speak.
I don't see any questions.
You're unmuted, but we can't hear you.
Hare Krishna.
Got it. Thank you. Go ahead.
I was just about to mention that please ask the question if anybody has.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, on this point Mataji raised regarding the physical presence and service, and you gave a nice explanation. I'm thinking that Krishna is absolute, whether his presence or his service, it's one and the same, or is there actually a difference?
So you're making a comment or you're adjusting the response?
And I'm trying to clear my understanding that Krishna is absolute.
Yes.
So his presence would be the same as the service we render to him. We as in the exalted devotees render to him.
What your understanding and her understanding and my understanding are equal, but that's not what Jiva Goswami said or wrote. Should I read it again? For her, the service was more, some kind of statement like that. And that was her question. That was puzzling to her. Are you with me? Should I read it again?
Please, Maharaj.
Okay. It'll take a bit, so hang on. It's a long section, so it may take a while to find it. Here it is. This was her way of thinking. So here's her way of thinking. Since the milk and the yogurt were for Krishna, they were even more attractive than Krishna. That was the special nature of her love. So I'll go back. Snigdhakanta said, Krishna's parents thought, this is my son, and from birth had possessiveness with complete disregard for their own bodies and houses. Brahma has said the following concerning all the people of Vraja, what to speak of his parents. That is, how are you going to reciprocate with them because they've dedicated everything to you? Since the milk and yogurt were for Krishna, they were even more attractive than Krishna. This is the special nature of her love. This was her way of thinking. Enduring great difficulties, she was not aware of her household chores that should be done. She thought more of Krishna as her son than her body and house. Making Krishna the object of her compassion, she thought that her duty was to serve Krishna. Krishna also understood that her scolding and punishment were her show of affection. What more can be said of her affectionate caring for him? So the milk and the yogurt were for Krishna. They were even more attractive than Krishna. That's the sentence that was puzzling. So do you want to offer some enlightening words on that question? How do we understand?
Trying to understand.
Me too. I did the best I could. The presence of his form is something we cherish and aspire for spiritually. And Mother Yasoda is already there, and to her, it's the affection and the mood of service, and therefore all things connected to that mood of service. Although Krishna is absolute and everything is of the same absolute nature, her affection was such that it has its special place. It still doesn't quite stretch to the, it's more important to her.
Thank you, Maharaj.
We'll have to send a text message to Jiva Goswami and ask what he means by that.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. I have a question. Just as English does. So we also heard that Srimati Radharani appeared on the scene when Mother Yashoda was trying to bind Krishna.
Yeah.
Was it really true, or was it really happened? And then also further we heard that when Mother Yashoda was trying to bind Damodara, Krishna, then it was not happening. Then Srimati Radharani handed over a piece of rope, and that was the one which Mother Yashoda could bind Krishna.
I don't know who you're hearing kata from, but I've never heard that one. The Radha binding Krishna with rope is a well-known Lila.
That's a different one.
But what you just said is not a well-known Lila. Now, I don't know where you heard that from, so I can't comment.
There's a devotee, Subhak Vilas Prabhu, got a book which is I think published 3 years back, and it's got detail about the Damodara Lila. It is mentioned there. So I was a little doubtful about that. How is it possible? This is the Lila between Mother Yashoda and Krishna, that Mother Yashoda's pure love was Acharya's mentioned. So I was a little...
The speaker was Shubha Vilas?
Subhak Vilas Prabhu, yes.
Shubha Vilas.
Yes.
Shubha Vilas, the same one that writes about Ramayana. So,
Same.
yeah, okay. So then I have a relationship with Shubha Vilas. If you could send me the context where he said that, I'll ask him, because he and I just had some, this is detail. He and I just had some exchange on Ramayana topics because he's very deeply immersed in Ramayana. So we had some exchanges about Ramayana. And he said made some statements. In one class, I asked him what's the authority behind it. And, we became mutually fine with the authority behind it. But then there were some other things that don't have authority behind it, not scriptural authority. He called it loka pramana. Loka pramana. It's very common in Vrindavan that there's little stories here and there that are not scripturally based, but people say them and then they become standard stories in Vrindavan. And, one needs to discriminate. You and I need to discriminate between something that's come from our acharyas and its, local lore. You know what I mean?
Yeah, correct.
It sounds like it's a local lore story, not from one of our acharyas. And therefore it doesn't have the same weight. It doesn't become a 0, but it's certainly not a 10.
Thank you, Maharaj. I'll find the section and I'll text.
Yeah, send it to me. And then I'll ask, where is it from? And my guess is Loka Pramana. But he's very, very clear and, he'll acknowledge if something has or doesn't have scripture. Well, anyway, without the detail. You send me and I'll ask him and I'll let you know. Okay?
Sure. Can I ask you another question?
Sure, sure.
We also heard that from another devotee. I just wanted to clarify that this Radharani by the Krishna Bhaktan, which is not happened on the Bhava Vrindavan, but it is eternally happened in the Golok Vrindavan. It was not clear for me that, how we can distinguish the Lila, which is Radharani binding Krishna with the rope of love. That didn't happen on the Bhava Vrindavan, and it's only happened in the Golok Vrindavan.
Well, you're opening the door to a topic, and if you want, I'll walk through the door.
Please.
And of late, I've had discussions with Shivram Maharaj and Purijan Prabhu, and a little bit with Lakshmi Moni and some other, and Bhakti Chaitanya Swami and some others on, what's on the other side of that door. So the research that I came up with, and few others without naming other names, according to Rupa Goswami, one book that he wrote, and Jiva Goswami in Priti Sandarbha, and in another source, I think Gopal Champu, it indicates, when you send me your message, I'll send back to you this research that says, in Krishna Loka, Krishna is eternally 16.
Yeah.
And if Krishna is eternally 16, then you're not going to have the Yashoda Damodara Lila. In fact, you're not going to have any of the pastimes of, the childhood, boyhood, and other than youth. His Pogan, all these pastimes that take place in Braja, when Krishna performs his pastimes in this world, do not take place in Krishna Loka, because he's eternally 16 in Krishna Loka. Rather, the understanding that learned devotees have. There's a dissenting opinion, but learned ISKCON devotees have the following opinion, that there is the semblance of, the memory of those pastimes, and it gets revived when the eternal pastimes of Krishna are performed in this world. Now, to link those two things together, let's say, is the Mother Jasoda in Krishna Loka and the Mother Jasoda that appears on earth are the same Mother Jasoda? The answer is yes. And then that Mother Jasoda, where Krishna performs his pastimes on earth, he moves from universe to universe to universe to universe continuously. That's another detail, very interesting explanation given by Jiva Goswami to explain that Krishna's pastimes are eternal. He is eternally taking birth, because as he's taking birth in this realm, on this earth planet, he's getting ready to take birth in another universe. And when he does take birth in this universe, he's just about to take birth in another universe, just like the sun is always rising somewhere. So it's eternal birth. That's the divyam nature of Krishna's janma. It's not just like he doesn't take a material body, and therefore it's a transcendental janma, or janma divyam. Anyway, so I'm getting away from your question, because it's on the other side of that door. The door says there is no Yasoda Damodara Lila in Krishna Loka. There's no childhood and youth pastimes of Krishna in Krishna Loka. They are eternal pastimes, and yet they're not taking place in Krishna Loka. So if your mind is not totally confused, I'll be surprised.
That's so Krishna Loka, you mentioned that it's not happening in Krishna Loka, then the question is Golok Vrindavan and Krishna Loka, is it same or different?
There's Goloka and Gokula, using those two terms. Okay?
Okay.
Like Brihad Bhagavatamrita, when Gopakumar is going back and forth between the two, he realizes they're the same. And so the answer is they're the same. They're the same.
Yeah.
But they're not the same. In the sense that in Krishna Loka, he's only 16, or always 16, eternally. Not only he, but all of his friends. It's because it's right there in their writings. Very clear. Not unclear. It's very clear. So they're eternally 16, and the places are the same, but the Boma Lila that Krishna performs his birth and other childhood pastimes in Vrindavan are not manifesting. They're manifest here, but not manifest in Krishna Loka. Now, how are we to understand these things at all, other than through the agency of our acharyas? So I'm only repeating what I've understood, what I've read, and I can share with you the document, but what's the technology of all this? How does it work? I don't have an answer to that. I only can say what our Acharya, Rupa Goswami and Jiva Goswami have said. I trust them. I don't doubt them. And there are other senior devotees. I'll just say specifically, in my discussions with Burijan, he said, I haven't decided yet. And I've only come across these things in the past, the COVID times, because I'm just diving into Krishna's pastimes in Vrindavan, like anything. And it was a total surprise. And I've been involved in Krishna consciousness for a long time. Like, more than 50 years. And it's like, oh, this is new to me. An old bamboo, it doesn't bend so easily. So, but, Rupa Goswami says it's good enough for me. What Burijan said was, maybe when we go back there, we can send a postcard back to somebody to tell them how old is Krishna. That was Burijan's answer. That was about, a month and a half ago. Okay, anybody else out there with some surprises from our discussion this evening?
There's a question in the chat window.
Could you read it?
There's a question in the chat window.
Could you read it?
Yeah, the question is about the Japa retreat. So if, usually our central literacy are there. So for them, I would like to say that we have a Thanksgiving retreat, which is coming up in 2 days.
Yeah.
So we can share those links, and if they can interested there,
Yeah.
we can join.
Okay, fine. Yes?
There was a question from the first day's lecture where there was a devotee asking why Radha and Krishna weren't married.
I don't remember that question, but go ahead.
But it was there in the chat box. It was after you left the lecture. Then
Okay.
And there was another one by Dityan Prabhu which said, did the pastime of the cows, the ceremony they had when Krishna was tending the cows from the calves when he was getting promoted, was that in Nandagram or somewhere?
So those are two unanswered questions. Okay. So say the first question again. Were Radha and Krishna married? That's the question?
Why weren't they?
Why were they not married? That's their relationship.
It was by Amara Gopikama.
Okay, but it's their relationship. Parakiya. That's their relationship. That's their relationship. When there was some suggestion that they become married, Purnamasi put a nix to it. You know that pastime, right? Pili Pulkar pastime, the yellow on her hand, and there was some idea, and Purnamasi said no. We should remember they are like the sun and the sunshine. They're not separable. So whether there is the formality of marriage or not the formality of marriage, with the formality of marriage, it doesn't make it any different than without the formality of marriage. They're enjoying pastimes together. If somebody likes the marriage part, they can go read Ramayana. One of the Chinese devotees, you remember the translator Surabhi? When we were in Hampi, there were groups of devotees that went to some of the temples, and there was one temple where Sugriva first met Ram. There's a temple. And she went inside with a group of devotees, and she had this experience standing before the deities, that this is Radha and Krishna being married in the form of Sita and Ram. And then she walked out, and there were cows all over the place mooing, and she felt she was transported to the spiritual world. It was like an experience. So, if somebody likes the Swakya, there's Ram's Lila. If someone likes the Parakiya, And the Lord is reciprocating with everybody, but that's his relationship with Radharani. Leela-wise, they're eternally associated, but without marriage. There's some further detail, but I won't go there. So now the other question was, unanswered question was?
Did the pastime where Krishna was being promoted to herding the cows perform in Nandagram?
I don't know, because if it specifies Nandagram, then I could say no. Intuitively, yes, because that's, excuse me, when he was, no, excuse me. According to Jiva Goswami, and according to Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, those two authorities, Krishna didn't go to Nandagram until he was 6 years, 8 months. So it didn't take place. It took place in Vrindavan, but not in Nandagram.
So they went to Nandagram after he started.
They went, everybody moved to Nandagram at 6 years, 8 months. It's part of a pastime.
Herding the cows at 6.
The pastime, the Gopastami pastime, just finished his 5th year, starting his 6th year.
And the calves were at 3.
At 3 years, 4 months. Shortly after they moved to Vrindavan. Maybe 3 years, 5 months. Shortly after they moved from Gokul to Vrindavan. So there's the answer. Not in Nandagram. Not yet. Anybody out there in Zoom land? And if not, looks like we'll end. One more? Okay.
There's so much, you're talking about how Jiva Goswami and Rupa Goswami, they find so much joy and poetry in just Damodara Lila. And even Satyavrata Muni in the Damodara Astakam. And it just seems that this Leela is so mesmerizing and so relishable.
Yes.
But why is it that I am not able to enter into that relishable state?
It has to do with the coverings. You could say, attachment to the temporary. We're still too much identifying with the temporary and not that's blocking. Like, why do clouds block the sun? Clouds have the power of blocking the sun. And the coverings in the heart have the power to block the full experience of bhakti. So that's why, then what to do? Well, you'll anartha-nivritti. And how do you do anartha-nivritti? You do bhajana very, very, very carefully with the fullest devotion you can gather together. In the association of like-minded devotees. We're discussing with Avig the impact that Indra had on the Kirtan world. And still, but certainly when he was present. So persons, spending time with Indra became Indraized. So by association with such persons who are actually tasting and relishing, that's a way to help. That brings out that it helps, remove the covering, at least, get glimpses. And when there's a glimpse, I know that there is that other reality. And you continue, as long as you're not complacent, you continue to strive for that higher reality, the higher consciousness experience. Good association is very important in getting to that stage. Okay. Thank you very much, Prabhupada Ki.
Thank you so much, Maharaj.
Yeah.